Hi guys, coming to you to do lesson 15 here. You notice I got some new stuff here. My son let me borrow his gaming headset. Some of you did not hear everything as clearly as I would have liked you to, so hopefully this will help. So yeah, I look a little silly, I know, but we do what we got to do, right? Also, I added some school bling here for you too. I hope that you appreciate it and just know that we're trying to do the best thing that we can for you guys and that we miss you very much. So let's get to it. Lesson 15, compare and contrast author's purpose. So an author's purpose is the purpose for why they wrote something, right? It's their overall message for what they wrote. So that's what we're going to be digging in today. All right. So what did we do last time, right? So last time we looked at and we examined a letter from Caroline Henderson about the Dust Bowl. Okay, we looked at some unfamiliar words and we put those down on a vocabulary log and dug into the letters from the Dust Bowl, and you were supposed to go back and find those letters or find those words within those letters. Hopefully you read all of the letters, even though we only spoke about one letter in particular. Hopefully you've read all the letters in order to get a really good idea of her purpose. If not, that's going to be something that you'll do today. All right, let's move on. So today we are going to look at Caroline Henderson's letters, and we are going to compare those letters to President Roosevelt's speech. We're going to look at the purposes of both of those texts differently and see how they compare to each other and how they contrast to each other. So what you're going to need today is an excerpt from the letters from the Dust Bowl, so the same thing that we used last time. The particular one that it keeps referencing starts on page 27 of your purple folder, but then also you're going to need Franklin Roosevelt's speech, which begins on page 20 in your purple folder, and then you are going to need those comprehension questions that we did last lesson that is on page 21, as well as your reading log. So if you need a moment to kind of gather all those things and put your hands on those page numbers so that you know where they are, do that now. You can pause this or stop the recording. Go ahead and get those things ready. Also, if you want to, go ahead and head you up a new page in your reading log that starts lesson 15, since today is lesson 15. If not, and you're ready to go, then let's go. All right, so first priority, finish answering the questions on the comprehension questions handout. There were 10 questions that you should have answered for the last lesson. They are on page 21, and basically they just had you dig back into the letter that we read and answer some questions about that. There were 10 questions. So first things first, if you haven't finished those yet, stop the recording now, finish those. Second priority is for you to complete all the cells of the vocabulary log handout. Hey, guess what? You guys didn't get a handout. We know that. We talked about it last lesson. But what I did ask you to do was to list those words. There were 8 words, and I asked you to define those words by going back into the text, trying to use the context clues to define those words. Obviously, if you just couldn't figure it out, Webster could help you, right? Get those dictionaries out, define those words, and then I wanted you to use the words in a sentence. So show me that you understand the context of the word and how to use it and how to use that word correctly in a sentence. So all of that could have just been done in your reading log. So again, if these things were not completed, let's not move on. Stop here and move on. But if you're ready to go, I'm ready to go. So let's go. All right. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 2 different excerpts, just a quick little snippet, one from Caroline Henderson's letter and one little tiny snippet from FDR's message or speech that he delivered. Okay, so what we're going to do with these 2 excerpts is basically what you're going to do at the end of this with the entire excerpts. Okay, so the first excerpt we're going to look at together is Caroline Henderson's, the last paragraph basically of her letter of March 8th. And again, can be found on page 27 is where it starts. But this particular part of it that we're going to read and go over is actually the very end of her letter. It's the last paragraph that is on the back of page 28. So you can either just stay here and read it with me, or you can turn to that page in your purple folder. And when I read this particular chunk of information, the things that I'm going to look for as I read are, what is Caroline Henderson's main point in this part of the letter? Okay. And then what learning is she referring to in the last line? Okay, that's that bolded line that you see there. Okay. All right, let's dig in. Let's read. I'm going to read this particular section for you. Our personal plans, like those of all the rest, are entirely dependent on whether or not rain comes to save a little of our wheat, to give grass or even weeds for pasturage, to permit the growing of roughage for the winter and provide some cover on the surface and promote the intertwining of rootlets in the soil to reduce wind damage. Our terraces are in good condition to distribute whatever moisture may come. We hope we have learned a little about protecting the soil, which is the basis of our physical life. All right, so what is Caroline Henderson's main point in this part of the letter? What do you think? Think to yourself for just a second about what you think her main point is. I'll give you some think time. So if you read all of Caroline Henderson's letters, you know that throughout the letters she talks about what the government is doing for the farmers. She refers to the terrace farming, or it says, or sorry, not terrace farming. That's social studies. Whew. Okay, so she talks about our terraces are in good condition. So what she's talking about is one of the practices that the government puts into place or during this time. It's called terraces, which is something to distribute moisture if they were to get any, right? Moisture is the main point. It says at the very top, depending on whether or not rain comes to save a little of our wheat. They need the rain, right? So she's referring to some of the new things that they've learned to do. They're doing them, but now they need that rain, right? So then it jumps into what learning is she referring to in the last line. The last line is bolded here and it says, we hope we have learned a little about protecting the soil, which is the basis of our physical life. So what learning is she referring to? Guys, I really feel like that it is about the terraces, right? That they're learning these different ways to farm now, and hopefully these different practices that they are putting into place are protecting the soil, which she states is the basis of their physical life. So if they can keep these farms going, then they keep going, right? Okay, so think about what Caroline Henderson's purpose of her writing these letters might be in this particular case. If I go back to the very beginning of her writings, to that very first page where it kind of tells me what it is that I'm about to read, kind of the introduction parts or portions of this, the very beginning of it says, when drought struck Oklahoma in the 1930s, the author and her husband stayed behind to protect their 28-year-old farm. Her letters to a friend paint a picture of dire poverty, desiccated soil, and long days with no sunshine. So that gives you a little snippet of the purpose, but then drop down even further and look at the editor's notes. And the editor says, for 28 years, Mrs. Caroline A. Henderson and her husband have been farming in Oklahoma. For the past 5 years, her household has been one of many that have fought as best they might the devastating effects, first of the unprecedented drought, and then of the resulting dust storms. Her letters written to a friend in Maryland open a vivid and pathetic chapter of American agriculture. So it is a very harsh eyewitness account into American agriculture and where the Western farmers are at during this time. Okay? So now let's look at President Roosevelt's words and how they relate to Caroline Henderson's life, as in what the pictures that she's painting. Okay, so we read this particular excerpt last time when we dug into President Roosevelt's speech specifically. Hopefully you remember it. If not, I'm going to read it to you right now. No cracked earth, no blistering sun, no burning wind, no grasshoppers are a permanent match for the indomitable American farmers and stockmen and their wives and children who have carried on through desperate days and inspire us with their self-reliance, their tenacity, and their courage. It was their father's task to make homes. It is their task to keep those homes. It is our task to help them with their fight. So, how does his words relate to Caroline Henderson's life? I'm going to give you some think time on that one. So remember the last time that we talked about this particular excerpt, we were honing in on the word indomitable. And we talked about what that word meant. And specifically, it meant that you couldn't take down those farmers, right? That there was no match. None of these things were no match for the farmers. And I think what you're looking here is that Caroline Henderson and her husband are those American farmers and those stockmen and the wives who have shown that self-reliance, right, and their tenacity and adversity and their courage. Caroline Henderson is painting the picture of just that. She is painting the picture of her and her husband's tenacity, of their courage, and what it is that they're doing to keep their home. And then they're also talking about what the government is doing to help them in their fight. FDR is kind of outlining what he's wanting the government to do in that fight. So I feel like that's how their words relate to each other. What do you think? All right, so obviously through both of these texts, there are multiple events that we could put down on our timelines. Remember way back when we created those long timelines and we hung them up. So what I want you to do as a part of when you're digging into the text today, before you start answering your questions and comparing and contrasting, I want you to note just a couple of more events with their dates that you could put on that timeline. Okay? All right, so here's where the work, the assignment, really digs in for this lesson today. So this is your exit ticket. This is what you're going to do as your assignment. You're going to answer these questions. You're going to dig back into those texts a little bit more and look at these questions. These questions should be in your reading logs, by the way. Okay, so what was Caroline Henderson's purpose for writing her letter? What was President Roosevelt's purpose for writing a speech? And then here's the compare and contrast part. How are their messages similar? And then how are they different? Okay, so you're looking at first a speech and then actual letters. Okay. Side note really quick before I wrap up today, you know, these letters from the Dust Bowl from Caroline Henderson, those are considered primary sources because they are eyewitness accounts of what Caroline and her husband were going through during the Dust Bowl and during that time of history, or a time within our U.S. history, right? Well, I would strongly encourage you to think about keeping a journal of some sort or some sort of writing and just kind of take some time to reflect on the things that are going on in the United States right now and why we're having to do the lessons that we're doing for you, because guys, your written accounts are also primary sources. And 30, 40, 50 years from now, when your grandchildren are digging into the United States history, who knows? This could be part of that, just like the Dust Bowl was a part of that for these people. So take into account what it is that you're looking at here. These are actual accounts of Caroline and her husband's account of what took place during this time. So it's kind of very interesting to think about that. Okay, so I'll get back to business here. Answer these questions after digging into those two texts, and you will come out doing just this. The fact that in this lesson you read a letter and examined it closely for meaning, okay? And then you also compared and contrasted the purposes of two writers, one being Caroline Henderson and one being President Roosevelt. So that's it. Lesson was easy peasy today, guys. There wasn't a whole lot to it. Miss Neal is going to come at you with lessons 16 and 17. So think about just doing these 3 lessons this week, 15, 16, 17, and we'll get them posted as soon as they are uploaded. I hope that you guys have a great week. Watch for emails from us. There may even really be kind of a cool opportunity to connect with us through some dress-up days. So we're going to get that info out to you as soon as we have it. We'll talk to you later. If you need anything, let us know. Reach out if you don't understand anything. Bye, guys.